Creme de la creme we have on today's show, the spectacular Camelia Entekhabifard, editor-in-chief of the Independent Persian, joining us from New York, from Milan, Italy, the exceptional journalist Elisa Serafini, journalist for Forbes Italy and Il Giorno, and the one and only Amir Oren, defense and government analyst here in our Tel Aviv studios. Thank you all so very much for joining our show tonight. And our topic for today is the hottest club of 2022, NATO, now expanding, but so many questions up in the air, including whether this expansion might risk NATO members themselves. So let's take a closer look, and we pick up the debate right after. Let's take a look.
Does the security of one country always come at the cost of another's? As Finland calls for a NATO membership application without delay, Russia is threatening that this expansion would damage Europe's safety. NATO is a 30-nation defensive alliance founded shortly after the end of World War II. Finland is set to announce its decision on Sunday. Its accession to NATO would more than double the length of Russia's borders with the alliance. And with Sweden likely to follow suit, the addition of both countries' substantial militaries would be a major boost to NATO's defensive power. But Russia does not see the alliance as merely defensive. Quite the opposite. Despite only 6% of its borders with NATO countries, the Kremlin sees mounting membership as encirclement. So, would Finland's membership be a double-edged sword, provoking Russia further towards the unthinkable nuclearization? Is Europe a safer or more dangerous place if either or both of these countries become a member of NATO?
So let's get to it. Is Europe a safer or more dangerous place if either? Gentlemen and ladies, you know the rules. You each get 30 seconds to lay out your initial stance, and we pick up the conversation right after. So, Elisa, the podium is yours.
So I think we need to ask whether if it's NATO provoking or if it's Putin provoking, because Putin is willing to do anything to control the former Soviet states, and it's on the action. So this is a dynamic confrontation, and I think that the eastward expansion is something that NATO needs to do to prevent and to protect the allies and the non-NATO countries. So I think it's something that we should take a look at this.
Great. Elisa, Amir, your time is on. Your take?
Well, NATO was formed, of course, in 1949 in order to contain Soviet expansionism in East and Central Europe. Now, Finland, of course, would not be an eastward expansion, but a northward one. And even though Finland has been neutral throughout the Cold War and even the decades after the Cold War, yes, there is quite a danger now of Russian paranoia, Russian belligerency, and yes, Finland and then Sweden should indeed join NATO.
And Camelia, last but not least, your take?
Sure, I believe it's a true provocation. And we have to remember Russia inherited a legacy of the former Soviet Union. At the time that Soviet Union collapsed, there was an agreement between Russia, at that time Yeltsin, with the international community that the NATO would not expand its membership through the Russia's neighbors, such as Poland, Lithuania, and other countries. First, Ukraine provoked to become member of the NATO, that we have this operation. And now with the provocation saying the Finland and Sweden to be joined NATO, definitely that has provoked Russia more.
Right, and please feel free to interact, dear panelists. So is it this bid now of Finland and Sweden essentially proving Putin right? It was his casus belli to begin with when it comes to Ukraine.
No, it's the other way around. Neither Finland nor Sweden would have thought to join NATO right now. There was no apparent need for that until Putin showed that there is indeed some need for NATO's existence. NATO has been underemployed, perhaps even unemployed, after the collapse of the Soviet Union. It went out of area to Afghanistan. It helped settle the conflicts in former Yugoslavia. And lo and behold, Putin gave it a raison d'etre. And because it is only a defensive pact, it doesn't have any aggressive intent. If it's Article 5, the Mutual Defense Treaty, is in force, yes, all the more reason for both Helsinki and Stockholm to fear Moscow.
But Elisa, if there's anything consistent about the remarks we're hearing from Moscow, is no to NATO expansion. So can we really not see it as a provocation to an extent?
Well, there have been some provocations from both sides, I think, but this is usually happening from all over the world and in the whole history, because geopolitical relations are like that. So there are allies and there are enemies, and you need to balance the power. So we have experienced about 2 years ago the exercise of the NATO army on the Baltics. So this was a provocation from the Russian point of view, but at the same time, invading a country and creating war crimes is another kind of provocation. So I think we are just experiencing real politics in a way. So international relations work like that. But at the same time, NATO, I think, is doing what they need to do. It's the defense treaty, as was mentioned before. So they need to protect the area. And the area consists also with borders countries, like the ones that you mentioned before.
But Camelia, as counterintuitive as it may sound, maybe this expansion of NATO at the end of the day is putting NATO members themselves at more risk than they were until this expansion was intact or pending.
It not put the NATO members at risk, even they put the international community's peace and prosperity in dangers. We can easily turn to another Third World War if Russia feels like has been traded by the majority of the NATO countries. We have to mention here at 2014, when Crimea has been added to Russia, of course, we have to condemn the attack in Ukraine first, and also putting another part of the countries added to another country, like as Crimea. But at that time, the United States has been trained and the NATO has been equipped Ukraine with the high-end military equipment, which in my opinion, it didn't left any room for Russia to feel in danger to attack Ukraine. So to pretend in such more aggregation in the neighboring country and also the peace and prosperity for the international community, we have to be concerned to not think any new number of the NATOs to be added to this group to be less provoked Russia.
And you know, Amir, it may sound far-fetched at this point in time, but not so long ago, there was a notion that Russia might even join NATO. Putin back then explaining President Clinton why Russia cannot join, if I'm not mistaken, because NATO was not about getting together against an external force, such as the situation we're seeing now. So my question to you is simple. Why isn't Russia a member of NATO?
Well, Ellie, you well remember personally our mutual, our joint trip to Brussels, including NATO headquarters.
Yes,
and indeed, at that time, the NATO-Russia conversation was quite friendly, because Putin at that time did not have any design on any of his neighboring country. Now, yes, there are some steps along the way, short of full membership of NATO. There was a partnership for peace, and there was some other arrangement with Middle Eastern countries and with Gulf countries. There was really no need, even though one might say that had Cuba or Mexico wanted to join the Warsaw Pact during the Cold War, the United States would have prevented it. But again, there is no aggressive intent on NATO's part, and if the fear in Moscow, and even more than in Moscow, in St. Petersburg, where Putin comes from, that missiles, anti-ballistic missiles, would be put in neighboring areas, this can be negotiated. This can be done in order to relieve Russian anxieties. There is no need for the Russians to fear that NATO is going to come to Moscow.
Elisa, I see that you want to comment on that.
Yes, just to add some few comments. We know that Italy, for instance, and other countries have established long-term relations with Russia, especially for the energy topic. So many countries do not have enough resources in the terms of energy. So for this reason, for instance, Italy is depending on Russia gas and other natural resources. And this time is really critical for this kind of countries, because those countries need to decide whether they want to keep their political alliance with NATO and with the US and so on, or they want to keep some sort of bipartisan relation from an economic point of view or from the political point of view. So I think this is interesting because we are at a change point in which those countries will need to decide. And from what I see, this war is creating the conditions to reposition these kind of countries, such as Italy, to think again about their own and our relations with those kind of countries. So it's going to be interesting to see what is going to happen. But at the same time, globalization will change in a way, because some kind of trades will be interrupted for political reasons.
So if I understand you correctly, Elisa, you're alluding to the fact that globalization might be reduced and we are going back to a model, or at least to some elements of the Cold War, of a more distinct division between the opposing sides.
Especially for the energetic resources. Yes.
And Camelia, Russia's reaction, this is the main question now on the table. Are we edging a nuclear war?
It can be. These days, we don't know if nuclear war is truly on the table, but it can be a huge war. Third war can be erupted in whole Europe and perhaps in the United States. I believe now more than we have to blame Russia for the continuation of this war, we have to blame NATO allies. For every day we were hearing this and that much amount has been considered to be given to Ukraine to equip them with the military equipment, rather than to speaking about construction, rather than speaking about making peace. They want to continue the war, clearly. And if we can say they are going to the neighbors of Russia, and we have to also condemn them, at the same time we have to condemn Russia too. But I am assuming now it's at the hand of the NATO and the European country to pursue anything at their hands to prevent a major war has been broken at this area. We are in a very fragile time. I'm sure the international communities are quite aware that we are seeing nothing in the world has been comes to the loop to looking at it. From Afghanistan to Middle East, Iran talks, everything went on the shadow because there is no good plans from the United States to know how they can end this war. And we were seeing Russia clearly didn't want to end unless what is asking for, which is the backboard of the NATO's allies from its border side to be completed.
Right. Camelia, Amir, and of course, Elisa, stay with us. We're taking a very short break, but when we get back, we continue our discussion and we ask whether NATO is doing enough when it comes to Ukraine. So stay with us, and you two viewers, don't go anywhere. We continue our summit right after the break. Welcome back to the summit. Still with us, Camelia Entekhabifard, Elisa Serafini, and Amir Oren. And we're staying on topic, but shifting focus when it comes to Ukraine. Is NATO doing enough? Let's take a closer look.
Nearly 3 months into the Russian invasion of Ukraine, with casualties mounting alongside international pressure, the UN reported that 1,000 bodies have been recovered around the Ukrainian capital, Kiev, in recent weeks, and Russian forces are continuing to focus their attacks on the east of the country. But resistance from Ukrainian troops is slowing their progress as the country continues their counter-offensive around Kharkiv, Ukraine's second largest city. NATO has pledged ongoing military and defense assistance to Ukraine, as Western countries continue to ramp up sanctions on Russia. But are these sanctions a strong enough deterrent against Russian aggression? As international condemnation strengthens, so does the brutality of Russia's intentions. As war rages on between the two countries, is NATO doing enough?
So let's get to it. Is NATO doing enough? Ladies and gentlemen, same rules, 30 seconds each, and then we pick up the debate. Amir, take the lead.
We are talking about NATO as if it has a mind and a will of its own. Of course it doesn't. It's a coalition, it's an alliance, and it does not operate according to majority votes, but only by consensus, which means that all 30 links in the chain must agree to whatever is done, and therefore the common denominator has to be very low. And if a certain country, such as Bulgaria or Albania, resists American pressures to do something, it will not be done.
Yeah.
And therefore, what is being done is quite sufficient under the conditions.
Yes, Amir will put a stop right here and continue shortly. Camelia.
I believe that NATO is responsible as much as Russia for ruining Ukraine. Ukraine, it went back to 15th century for this competition between the West and between Russia, and it just become a ground for these countries to try to control each other and to defeat each other, unfortunately.
Elisa, your time is on.
Yeah, I think they're doing the right amount of actions, and we have to know that NATO is a defensive treaty, so they are doing what they need to do, defend and prevent the escalation. And in addition to that, NATO is encouraging individual allies to pledge more and more weapons and to defend the country of Ukraine. Ukraine has a fundamental right, the right to defend itself. So this is something related to the United Nations Charter. So the EU and the NATO are doing everything to protect this right. So I think this was correct in the actions of the NATO and the EU.
And continuing this point, Elisa, that you and also Amir made, it's important to stress it's not even NATO, it's NATO members that are helping Ukraine at the moment with weapons, with guidance, etc. Still no troops on the ground. In this respect, what could be a game changer?
Well, both... Oh, okay, go ahead.
No, okay. The game changer will be if anything crossed the border. So in Poland, there are many weapons that are already directed to Russia. So this will be like something that will change if an airplane would cross the border, or if anything happens on NATO members. This will change everything, of course. So as you mentioned, NATO members are helping Ukraine, but at the same time, NATO army is ready to do anything to protect the members.
Amir, please.
The most important feature here is deniability. As long as the Russians do not condemn and do not see whatever the Americans and others, by the way, not only European NATO members, could be Australia too, and others, but as long as Russia does not admit and does not care whatever is done, then there is no fear of escalation. But we all remember how both world wars started, by the alliance system in which there were guarantees, in which one country came to the help of another one attacked, and once another country joins Ukraine in the fight against Russia, it could spread like a wildfire throughout Europe and engulf the entire world.
But I would like to point out, perhaps I'm being too daring with the terminology here, potential NATO hypocrisy, because Finland and Sweden both long sought after on behalf of NATO. A swift process is expected once indeed begins. But Ukraine has been for years now trying, and NATO has been stalling, saying no, 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 no. So double standard here to an extent, Camelia?
I explained that earlier. It was a clear agreement between Russia and between international community, which none of its neighbors become member of the NATO. So that has been a deal done. it was nothing to question. And for Russia, this is a provocation of its security, its Russia building. The Cold War ended. It ended maybe formally, but we understand that it was always a provocation from the both sides, from the Western sides, led by the United States, and from the Russia side. As much as we have to condemn, as I said, and not agree with the attack to Ukraine and have sympathy with all these poor fellow Ukrainians lost their home and lives, at the same time, we have to condemn the NATO for still equipping and still helping to continue the war. Russia is not there to defeat it. We understand Russia is one of the hub. Russia is one of the big power in the world, and they are not going to be defeated. As much as we send the military equipment, rather than speaking about peace, rather than not involving the United Nations to make peace between Russia and Ukraine, unfortunately, we can see continuation of this war, and in a very, very dangerous scale. It can be really, as I said, gets to all around and get to the West. It gets maybe nuclear warhead threat. I have one more point to make. We remember that when Russia sent these missiles to Cuba back to the years of the presidency of Clinton, we clearly get close to having a war between the United States and Russia. And then Russia agreed to pull back, but it has been sent to Cuba. So we understand that at that time it was very dangerous for the United States having at its security zone Russian with provoking or having its military or allies assisting. At the same time, we have to understand how important is Ukraine for Russia, and we see that at the same turn and pattern.
Right, and before we wrap up this debate, maybe NATO and generally speaking the West needs to actually send flowers to Putin to an extent, because only because of him we're seeing NATO becoming relevant again, and the West as a whole perhaps refinding its internal moral compass that is bringing it together?
Well, the United States, especially the Department of Defense, has already shifted its resources and doctrine from counterterrorism, including Daesh, to what they call near peer, that is Russia and China. And apparently, Putin's thinking also had, in part, China 10 or 20 years from now being the dominant power, and therefore he rushed to invade Ukraine before China becomes even more powerful than both the United States and Russia.
Elisa, final remarks?
I think you made a great question. So who broke the balance, by the way? Because Ukraine wanted to join the NATO and the NATO was not allowing it. This was a balance in a way. Who broke this balance? I think we all know the answer, and we have experienced it as war crimes and human rights violations in Ukraine.